Gang.
All right.
Night school.
Night school.
Meditations.
Meditations. Today we're going to talk about Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. The copy I read was primarily translated, or the copy that I mostly read was translated by Gregory Hayes. Um Marcus Aurelius was a Roman emperor, and he is kind of considered, whenever I hear of Stoicism, or whenever I hear of Stoics, Marcus Aurelius is who I think of. Every time I hear it mentioned, that's usually the first name that comes up. He's kind of considered the quintessential Stoic,
Hmm.
which I found is kind of interesting because Stoicism was sort of different at different points in history, and it's a philosophy that's kind of evolved, and he's not necessarily representative of the school of thought as a whole. But that's kind of that's how people tend to view him.
And that's
Um,
just a category that people threw him in after the fact, right? It's not like Stoicism was a body of philosophy that he associated himself with.
the way Gregory Hayes actually put it was that he feels like uh, that Marcus Aurelius would not have. He identified himself as a philosopher. He was big into philosophy, and that was really important to him. But if he had to pick one school of thought or one particular type of philosophy, certainly Stoicism would have been what he picked. But he
Mm.
probably wouldn't have pegged himself that way.
Yeah.
And there isn't a lot of mentions of Stoicism or of the originators of Stoicism within the content of the book,
Mm-hmm.
but certainly a lot of the same themes are there, and it totally makes sense that he gets associated that way. Um, so the book is it's not really even a book. What it is it's 12 books, and each of them, the theory on kind of what these were was that these were like scrolls that he had written for himself. It wasn't really meant to be read by anyone else. These are like
Beautiful.
12 different scrolls that he had written. The first one covers like all the most important people in his life, and what he feels he learned from them, or like what he owes to them. And the rest of them are like a lot less structured, and they're kind of I feel like they're kind of relatable to me in that they're like things that he wrote for himself as like reminders of what he considers important, or just like ways to encourage himself to be brave or be strong or to not worry. And so they're all just
Mm.
like reminders for himself in a lot of ways. And and it wasn't written as a book, so it doesn't have much of a structure to it. It's like, and it's repetitive because there's a lot of like the same themes, and he's just telling himself the same things about, like, don't worry, don't worry, in 100 different ways, he says throughout the book. um, but it's the kind of book that it reads a lot like Proverbs in some cases, where like you can
Mm.
just pick it up and you can flip to a page, and there'll be something really wise and courageous that he says on that page, and you can just pick out one paragraph and do it that way. So reading it through is a little bit repetitive, I suppose. And as I say this, I remember Juice was reading this, and he was saying that like it's not something that he's reading through. He just like picks it up once in a while, reads a little bit of it, and then continues on,
Okay.
which totally makes sense to me now. Like
Yeah.
that's
That's how Proverbs is too. When you read
yeah,
all the way through Proverbs, it's way better to read one a day.
right. Um, but yeah, there's a lot of really interesting stuff that he said in here, and it was also really interesting to learn about his life and about the history of Stoicism. And I suppose I want to start with that, starting with the history of Stoicism, and what principles were important to it, and how that kind of evolved over time. So Stoicism was was a type of Greek philosophy founded by a guy named Zeno, who lived from 333 to 262 BC. He was Greek. He lived in Athens, and as I understand it, around this time, philosophy was extremely important to the Greeks, and that this was like a market, and there was a lot of different philosophies, and they referred to them as schools of thought. And the Stoic school was one that would later become really important to Rome, and to Marcus in particular. And the name Stoic was interesting to learn about. Stoa was a Greek word for porch or patio, and there was just this one porch where Zeno would teach from, and so it was like the word means like porchism or something like that. Like it was just referencing, yeah, yeah, you go to the porch and you listen to what Zeno has to say at the porch. It's
Hmm.
porchism. And so Zeno was the one who founded it. It became real popular, and his student Cleanthes, and then his student Chrysippus also furthered it.
So Chrysippus was Cleanthes' student.
Yes.
Okay.
So Chrysippus was like Zeno's grand student.
Mm-hmm.
And Cleanthes doesn't really come up again, but because Chrysippus was sort of the guy that it seems like structured it and made it more of a system that people could understand and track better. So he kind of was taking what Zeno and what Cleanthes had done and structuring it better. And so a lot of like the early Stoicism documentation that we have comes from Chrysippus. There's not much from Zeno now because he was the one that was writing it down more and structuring it correctly. The Stoic philosophy has a few things that are important to it. One is that the world is rational, that the world has a structure and it follows the same kind of rationality and the same kind of logic all the time. And that you can learn that and you can participate with it better. And the rational world is controlled by a force that they refer to as the logos, which we've heard of that from, I've heard of it from Jordan Peterson a lot. And that Greek word logos is sort of the root word of like logic now. When we just think of logic, it comes from that word. So logos was the logical force that structured the universe and that shaped the way things go. And so Stoicism
Wow.
was pretty deterministic. It was pretty like there is a set course and it's determined by the logos. And the logos can basically just be interpreted as God. That's what it means.
Mm-hmm.
That's the intelligence that's steering everything.
Mm.
And the Stoics also believed in free will, which we've talked about this a bit, like the difference between determinism and free will, and how possibly those could both coexist if you're making the decision to participate with the deterministic way it's going to be. And so the way they viewed free will in regards to a world that they felt was already predetermined was that it was just being willing to participate with it. That like what's going to happen is going to happen, and you can either participate with it and go with the flow, and you're going to have a lot better time of it. But you can not participate, and it's still going to happen, but it's going to happen to you in a worse way. And a metaphor that was used to describe it is it's like a dog that needs to like is going for a run. Like it can run with the person or it can be dragged by the person, but it's going there no matter what. And I like that idea, the idea
Nice.
that it is kind of both things and that you need to be willing to participate with the determinism if you want to live a life that's going to be satisfying. Otherwise, you're going to feel like a victim the whole time. The Stoics also felt that the world was in constant flux. It's constantly changing. Everything is constantly dying and being restructured and being reborn. And that's something that Marcus talks about quite a bit in the book. He sort of ruminates on that idea a lot of like, why should I be scared of death? This is a natural part of how things work. I'm going to die, and then my atoms are going to be restructured into something else, and everything will continue changing forever. And if you look at, and he brings up that like, if you look at other things, for example, if you have some idea that makes you realize that you've been living a wrong way or that you need to do something differently, that version of you dies, or that
Aspect of you.
exactly who you were before you knew that doesn't exist anymore, and that the world is
Yeah.
constantly dying and constantly changing that way.
Yeah.
The Stoics felt that the logos was not an impersonal force that existed outside of this and was somehow like pulling strings within it. They said that the logos had physical form, and that what would happen is the logos expressed itself in everything through a material, a substance that they referred to as pneuma, and that the pneuma was a part of the logos that was made physical and put into every living being to animate them. And the pneuma also was put into all material things. Even dead things have pneuma in them to make them what they are. So this table has pneuma that holds it together as a table, and when the pneuma leaves it, it will crumble and it'll become something else, which they're just saying chi. They're saying it's the exact same idea as chi. Just how John Chang and Costa Danow said that there's yang and yin in all living things, and there's only yin in dead things, and they're just constantly, they leave those things, and it's so interesting to hear that confirmed in a totally different social context.
Yeah.
That like years, long before, the Greeks were saying the same kind of thing. And it makes me remember that
A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, we were already talking about this shit.
we're already talking about pneuma.
Because
And
that's what the Force was based on, right? The chi.
it must be. Yeah. Yeah, I mean it's certainly based on like Zen ideas at
Yeah.
least. So yeah, chi must be the same kind of thing as the Force. Yeah. And I remember that, so Costa Danow, he's the guy that wrote Magus of Java, Nekong, which was episodes 1 and 3. And I remember Costa Danow mentioning in one of those books, he talked about chi and the history of chi. And I remember him saying the Chinese call it chi, the Japanese called it ki, the Hindus called it prana, and the Greeks called it pneuma, but they're all talking about the exact same thing.
Wow.
And Costa Danow, I listened to him on a podcast, and he said that he considers himself first and foremost a Stoic. Like that's how he sees
Really?
himself. So it's interesting to have kind of that.
John Chang said that about himself?
No, oh, I'm sorry, Costa.
I misheard you.
Costa Danow said that.
Costa's the guy who wrote the books. John Chang was the guy who he studied?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I just misheard you, but that's interesting.
Yeah. So when Costa saw Ring of Fire, the documentary that featured John Chang, he was already very familiar with pneuma through his study of Greek. And I'm sure that he was familiar with it in the context of chi as well.
Right.
But yeah, I'm sure that was part of the lens he was seeing it through, was thinking about pneuma and stoicism. The Stoics also believed, they said that the destruction and reintegration and recoming together of everything was constantly happening. And they also said that that is true for the universe itself as well, that the universe is something that starts, and in the end it'll be destroyed, and then it'll bloom again, and it'll do the same thing over, that we're in a repetitive loop of the world being destroyed and remade, and that's just what we're doing, is we're participating in this process of constant change, and that's going to happen whether we like it or not. And they referred to what would be like the end of our existence as ekpyrosis. That's the end of the universe, when everything goes away, it is wiped clean, and we get a new universe again.
Mm-hmm. A new universe, as in like lining up with the Christian idea that there's going to be a point or the idea that some Christians have, I should say, there's going to be a point at the end of time where everything's perfect, or more just like it's going to be reborn and all happen again.
I think what they're saying is not that there'll be a point where it's perfect. I think that they think it's basically always perfect, that it is what it is, and it can't be anything else. So it is always perfect. But the ekpyrosis is when maybe it'd be what physicists refer to as the heat death of the universe. That like eventually there is going to come a time when things can't exist anymore. And I don't know what that looks like exactly. I don't know if that means everything's sucked into a black hole, because that kind of seems like a logical conclusion to it, that it's just eventually all going to be one black hole or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. I don't know if they have sort of more details on how exactly they envision that looking, or what the end of the world's going to be like. But they believe the end is coming, and that it's the same as any other death of any other thing, and that all those atoms will get put back together in a new configuration and will play again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
The grand student of Zeno, Chrysippus, he was the one that did a lot of the writing, and how he had kind of divided up a lot of these schools of thought that the Greeks would study, I suppose. They were meant to kind of encompass they were meant to be like theories of everything, of like how does the world work, how should we think about it, and what should we do. It has to be like a complete theory of everything. And Chrysippus had kind of divided Stoic thought up into logic, physics, and ethics. So logic was about the right way to think, ethics are the right way to behave, and physics are how does this work? What are the rules of the world? And so pneuma was a lot of the physics aspect of it.
Interesting.
Now, Marcus was really into ethics. He wasn't as into logic or physics. And there's a chapter in here somewhere where he says something like, he's thanking, it's when he's going through and he's thanking everyone
Who's contributed to who he is.
Yeah, and the last part of that is he's thanking the gods for what they've done for him, and he thanks the gods that he never got too preoccupied with logic or physics. So he appreciates that, I'm glad that was never all that important to me. I'm glad that it was the ethics that were important to me.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so a lot of the stuff that Marcus talks about, it reminds me of Goggins, David Goggins.
Mm-hmm.
It reminds me of him. It's all very very hardened. Nothing can hurt me, and if anything does hurt me, I can ignore the pain. And if the pain becomes unbearable, I will die, and that will be okay because I will cease to exist. He's just he's so hardened, and so I can endure anything. And he almost seems joyless. There's nothing in there that's about joy or happiness or any of that. He doesn't seem to feel a lot of that, which when we use the word stoic now, it means something like strong but somber, or strong in the face of adversity, or brave in the face of adversity. When I think of a stoic person, I think of somebody that is facing something really scary, but they're just stone-faced and they're unfazed by.
Unfazed is exactly the word I was thinking of. Yeah.
Yeah.
Unfazable is what I would associate with stoic.
Yeah. And so that was kind of how that was the original ideas of Stoicism, and that was up until 206 BC. Now, at some point between 206 BC and Marcus's birth, 400 years later, 300 years later, there was the Roman Empire took over the Greek Empire. And so the Greek Empire got kind of became a part of the Roman Empire, but the arts and the philosophy of the Greeks became a really big part of Roman culture. So although the Greeks were absorbed into the Romans, the Greeks still very much expressed themselves in the Roman Empire after that point, through their philosophy and through their art.
Okay.
And Stoicism became really popular in the Roman Empire after that point. And it seems like that is partly because Stoic thought is really conducive to order. It's really conducive to being okay with what your position is and going with the flow. And those are good things. Those are good ethics to.
If you're doing what God tells you, not if you're doing what some tyrant moron tells you.
I suppose so. I mean, the Stoics would believe that, God is controlling all of it, that what's happening is what's happening for a reason, and God decided that tyrant needs to be in charge. So it seems like a convenient philosophy for the Romans to promote, because it was not the kind of philosophy that was everything is random. It's just atoms floating about and we're just all clashing against each other. And it wasn't like that. It was very much there is a purpose, there is a reason, go with the flow and things will be easier. And so that became really popular among the ruling class and was very much promoted among the lower class too. And so by the time of Marcus, Stoicism, although it hadn't, those other things were still a part of it, but they were not talked about as much. The logic aspect and the pneuma aspect, those became less important to it, and instead it became more and more about the ethics of how you should behave within the Roman Empire. And so that's kind of the reason that now when we say Stoic, we're talking mostly about how you should act instead of these other ideas.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Because teaching people the logic and physics aspect of Stoicism will teach them to think for themselves and then look at their rulers and go, no, you're not this and that, and
Sure.
question things.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's kind of the history of Stoicism, and leads us to, I'm going to talk about Marcus's life a little bit. So Marcus was born in 121 AD. He was high class. He was like a member of a ruling family, but nowhere near in line to be emperor. Like when he was born, it would have been a very strange idea that like this kid's going to be emperor one day. There's a weird series of events that leads to that happening. His father died when he was real young, so he barely knew him, and he was primarily raised by his grandpa. And he sort of like he talks a bit about his grandpa and a bit about his father, but his father, it seems like the only things that he knows about him is that he was manly and straightforward, and that must have just been stories that he heard of him, I suppose.
Okay.
Yeah. At this time, I also meant to mention that because of the Greeks being kind of brought into the Roman Empire, at this time, it was basically a bilingual society. So everybody spoke Latin and Greek. But when people would discuss philosophy or write about philosophy, it would be in Greek. And so the scrolls that he would have written this on would have been in Greek. And there is some notes that like that some sentences sound weird, and it could be because Greek wasn't like his first language, so he wasn't like as strong in his Greek as he was in his Latin. So there is some chance that like some things weren't quite what he meant to say. Plus, the way that these scrolls ended up finding themselves, the way that I have them right now, is like hundreds of years after he dies, it like resurfaces and it gets popular for a little bit, and then eventually it's lost for hundreds of years, and there's like one copy left, and then a guy copies another copy of it, and there's two times in its existence where, as far as they know, there was only one copy that existed, and someone found it and was like, oh shit, we should probably rewrite this.
Jeez.
And then it wasn't until like the 1500s when we had the printing, I think that was when the printing press is, they said that was when the first printed edition of it was, that it became like, okay, now we're actually not gonna lose it.
Right. Wow.
But it was
crazy.
real close to just being lost, and people don't even know, like, wait, who took these scrolls? Who wrote them down? Or like how they don't know who took care of it in the hundreds of years from his death until hundreds of years later, when all of a sudden people are talking about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in 137, I'll just say Marcus's age. So when Marcus is 16, the emperor at the time, Hadrian, he got sick, and Hadrian didn't have any sons to be able to pass it on to, and it became clear that like, he has to pick a successor, or because he's not going to be around much longer. So he picks a guy named Saonius, and Saonius dies like almost immediately, and it doesn't say how he dies. So I don't know if that's coincidence or it could be assassination because someone else would rather be emperor. But he picks a guy, that guy dies. He picks another dude named Antoninus. Antoninus he's a senator, and he doesn't have any sons, so he's like a high-ranking public official, but he doesn't have any sons. And Emperor Hadrian says, I want you to be the next emperor on the condition that you adopt, and Marcus was Antoninus's nephew, I believe. Wait, no. Marcus was not his nephew. He was just from another high-ranking family. But he told Antoninus, I need you to adopt Marcus and also adopt Lucius. And Lucius was Antoninus's nephew. So he adopts two kids, and he's supposed to raise them to potentially be the next emperor someday. So it's a weird series of events where like there's the first pick dies, the second pick, okay, I'll pick you, but I need you to pick these kids and take care of them. And that's what leads to him eventually being emperor.
Weird.
So he adopts the two kids, and he's scheduled to be the next emperor. And the second kid, Lucius, he's 7, and Marcus is 16, so he's 9 years younger.
How do you talent scout a 7-year-old to be a future emperor?
Blood, I guess. I think that's like the kind of logic that like because he comes
Closest
from
thing related?
yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, because he comes from like a good family, that he would be a good king,
Oh, God.
something like that.
Maybe.
And it seems there's like a lot of kids seem to die, and I think that maybe picking 2 kids was like just in case one
Right.
of
People
these
just die back then. It's
people
like
just
turtles running
die.
up a beach.
Yeah,
Fucking some of them are going to live.
yeah. Um, 138. So this is the very next year when Marcus is 17. The emperor dies, and Antoninus, his adopted father, takes over. Antoninus is apparently a pretty good king. He's like not real noteworthy, but nobody remembers him as like a monster either. So pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
7 years later, he's 24. He marries Antoninus's kid, his daughter Faustina, and which was weird because apparently, like, he was said to have been a childless senator. So I think they were like not counting women as a child.
Right.
So he's got a daughter, and when she's 14, she gets married to Marcus.
Yikes.
Yeah. Then, what is it? When he's 40, finally, Antoninus dies, and Marcus takes over as emperor. But his first act as emperor, and this wasn't totally, he didn't have to do this, but I think that it sounds like he had interpreted this as probably being Emperor Hadrian's intention to begin with. He thinks that probably he meant for them to be co-emperors. So although he is crowned emperor, he decides his first act is to make Lucius co-emperor with him.
Wow.
So the two of them, these two adopted brothers, decide to be emperors together.
Fat ass.
Yeah. And it's interesting because Lucius is not remembered well. He's remembered as someone who was very indulgent and selfish and not a just king, whereas Marcus is remembered much more fondly as being someone of good character. So the two of them rule. Things go pretty well. Well, no, they don't. The next year, there is a war that starts. There's a nearby empire called the Parthian Empire. There had been peace for a long time, but war breaks out, and Lucius and a general named Cassius have to go east to go deal with that war. And also Lucius and Marcus both have no war experience because there was no war in Antoninus or Hadrian's time, so it wasn't something that they saw growing up. It wasn't something they had experience with, and so it seems like a lot of the battle strategy would have been left to generals and people that had been training specifically for war all their life. And so Cassius ends up being that guy. He's noteworthy as being in charge of that war.
Okay.
The war goes on for 4 years, but they win. Lucius and Cassius come back. No. Just Lucius comes back with the soldiers, with whatever men were left over. But they bring disease back with them, so a plague sweeps the land. So there's a plague, and then 3 years later, Lucius dies of a stroke, which I don't know exactly what caused that. There's not a lot of information on it, but that's what they say, that he died of a stroke.
Like they knew what the hell was going on.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, he kind of shook around and then stopped breathing.
So he dies. So now Marcus is the emperor, but it seems like he basically always was. Like he was the one that people looked up to more. He made a lot more sense. He was the one that had been studying philosophy all his life. That was something I should mention that he had been, as a young man, he had been obsessed with because they had been training him to be a politician since he was young because the family he was from, he's supposed to be a good politician. So they had introduced him to a lot of philosophers, and that was something he got real into. There's even stories of, like, there are some letters that we still have that are letters between him and one of his teachers named Fronto. And his teacher would just, like, give him advice on philosophy and sometimes get annoyed with him because he would get into philosophical schools that he didn't think were worth looking into. And so Fronto would get annoyed with him, like, I don't know why you need to be studying that. I'm telling you, look at this. But
Right.
He was just really interested in all kinds of philosophy.
Nice.
So in 175, this is like This is 6 years after Lucius dies. Cassius apparently has spent most of his time over in the east where they had fought the war, and he decides, and this might be in light of the fact that Lucius died, and so now there's just Marcus. I don't know, but he decides that he should be emperor, and so he rebels, and he takes over half the Roman Empire, and he is referring to it as the Eastern Roman Empire or something like that. And he says that he's the emperor now, and the people there support his claim because he's viewed as like the guy that won. He's the one that won the war. It's not considered that Marcus did it. As they're about to go to civil war, which is inevitable, one of Cassius's one of his men, I guess, decides to kill him. So he gets assassinated. Somebody wants to avoid civil war, and he gets assassinated. But Marcus still has to go on a tour across the whole empire to go reestablish, hey, I'm the emperor. I'm Emperor Marcus Aurelius. While on that trip, his wife ends up dying.
Getting killed or what?
No, I think just sickness is what it sounded like.
Right, people just died.
Yeah.
Sneeze, dude.
God.
Dude, sneeze.
It's gone. It's gone.
No, it's not.
It might be back.
It's just right there waiting.
So Faustina dies. And like we're saying, people just die. So Faustina in her life, and how long has it been since they got married? He's 54. They got married when he was 24. They've been together for 30 years. She had 13 kids in that time.
Oh, cool.
And he has one
That's
boy
great.
left.
He has... Oh, God.
Because they're just all dying.
Yeah, they just died.
They just died.
Right, right.
So he's got one...
I thought you meant they had 12 girls.
No. It doesn't say the breakdown of it, but just they
Right.
had 13, but now there's one boy left. So he needs to train
Because
him.
that's all that matters.
Yeah.
Had 13 kids? Oh, how many boys do you have left? That's the only question.
Not even interested in the breakdown. How many boys you got left? So his son, Commodus, he trains him to be the next emperor. At this point, when Faustina dies, he's 54. So he's training his kid to be emperor. And when he's 56, he's pretty much given the emperorship over to his son. And it seems like that was often the norm, that like people would like sort of gradually transition power before they got too old or something like that. And it sounds like the emperor's duties would be broken down into like several different categories of like, leader of the army, leader of the church, leader of this, leader of that, and in different ways like that. And so he gave control of everything but the church over to his kid because apparently that's how it works. You hold on to the church part until you die, but you give the rest over. There's another war happens, and so he kind of fights that with his son, but he ends up dying at 58 years old in 180, which was a good life, for that time.
How old was he?
58.
Wow.
Yeah, made it a long time.
Freaking marathon.
So his son, Commodus, ends up taking over as emperor. And unfortunately, that ends up being a disaster. His son ends up being a shitty king. He's considered another Nero, which Nero is often referred to as like the horrible tyrant king of Rome. He ends up being viewed as another Nero, and that it's like 7 years or something into his reign, he gets assassinated, and then there's like a civil war that breaks out. There's a series of struggles that eventually leads to Rome not being the Roman Empire anymore.
So Rome falls under Marcus Aurelius' kid?
It seems like history views it that although Rome didn't fall under his kid, the aftermath of the death of Commodus ended up being a chaotic world where there was a lot of different people that felt they had a claim to the throne, and it ended up being real chaotic, and there was no central leadership anymore, and that eventually that leads to a series of struggles that leads to the end of the Roman Empire. Yeah.
So the beginning of the end, this is a little off topic, but the beginning of the end for Rome was the point where they couldn't agree who was the leader anymore?
I suppose so.
Yikes.
Yeah. Yeah, that's not a good thing. And that's a pretty common trope in, like, I mean, in history and in plenty of TV shows and stuff. When there's a divide as to who is in charge, that's the perfect time for maybe an enemy to strike. Maybe see if there's a little room to kind of take over some of it.
Right. Yikes.
Yeah. So hopefully,
Yeah.
hopefully we make it through. We'll see.
No, we'll be fine.
So that's the story of his life. He was into philosophy for the entire time. He was constantly studying it, and we don't know exactly what part of his life he was doing all this writing in.
Oh, really?
It may have been just across his whole life, because we don't have dates on any of it.
He makes references to being the emperor in the book, though, right?
He does. Yeah, definitely.
So all that means is that he probably wrote at least those parts while he was emperor. So
Yeah.
it really doesn't tell you much.
Yeah. So he was writing after he was 40, at least.
Yeah. But I mean, like in the identity part where he's talking about like who he is, how he identifies. He's like, I'm a man, I am a ruler. You know, he's like going over that part. He could have even been saying that before he was acting emperor, just identifying himself as a ruler.
He might have been. Yeah. I mean, he was certainly like there are a couple other emperors that are referenced as like people that he learned from. So he definitely studied history and studied other emperors. Emperors were already on his mind, as I'm sure they're going to be if you're like, if you're a Bush in the
right
under the Clinton presidency, you're going to think about it or something.
Right. Yeah. Totally.
So like I said, the book is pretty repetitive. What he's written here is pretty repetitive because he didn't think anyone was going to read this, and it wasn't important for it to be palatable or straightforward, I guess. There was a few themes that I kind of picked out that feel like they were a lot of what he was obsessed with. I wrote down here straw dogs. Like he's really into that idea.
Oh, wow.
He doesn't mention straw dogs, but he talks a lot about people and about how if you understand what drives people, if you understand that they're not like acting on their own will and that they're being driven forward by something, you can understand that like their opinions aren't all that important and that you don't have to worry so much about what other people are doing because they're just acting on impulses. And so there's a lot of language in there that's sort of like it minimizes any negativity that someone might feel towards somebody that does something that annoys you or that you think is bad. Like, yeah, but remember what they are. Remember that they're not much. They're just acting it out. Memento mori is a phrase that is often associated with Marcus Aurelius and with Stoicism. It's a Latin term that means remember you will die. And that's something that, like, death is something that he's clearly obsessed with. He thinks about it all the time. He always reminds himself that, like, you just need to keep going and eventually you will die and all these things don't matter. And remember that no matter how much suffering you're going through right now, eventually you will come to rest and, maybe you return to God or maybe your atoms are simply split apart. He seems very open to, like, although he does seem to believe that there are gods and that there probably is a logos, those things do seem to be things that he believes. He always says, even to the writing to himself here, he reminds himself that there is a possibility that that's not right and that there is just nothing and that we're going to be split up into atoms and you will cease to exist. He'll say that, like, when I'll die, either I'll return to God and that will be good, or I will return to dust and I won't exist anymore and all troubles will be gone. So he thinks about that a lot, and he thinks about just keep going, go through the suffering, you're going to be fine, it'll end soon. And he's sort of, I guess he kind of messes with, like, the idea of he messes with perspective a lot. And he thinks about, like, think about all the great kings and where are they now? And all your great acts, maybe you'll be remembered, but for how long? A finite amount of time. and then you'll be forgotten. So it doesn't matter if people remember you or not, because zoom out a little bit. No, no, not anymore. Eventually, they're all going to die, everybody that remembered you. And so he plays with that a lot, and that's a pretty recurring theme.
Yeah. That's a huge way to think. Although I doubt he would have predicted that we'd be talking about him 1900 years later.
No. I don't think he thought anybody was going to read this. Maybe his family sees it, and he'll like look kind of weird. Like that feels
Right.
relatable to me. That like maybe someone will read something that like I wrote for my I wrote a reminder note on my laptop at some point about
Yeah.
some philosophical idea that I was thinking about that day, and it'll look kind of weird, but like that's it was what he was writing. He had to write to himself to constantly remind himself of what was important to himself, and
Yeah.
yeah.
Crazy.
Truth was very important to him. Just never telling a lie, always saying what's true, and that there's nothing to be scared of. If everything you're saying is true, then nothing can hurt you. He was big into truth. And the last thing I felt like was a recurring thing was be here now. Like he was very into being in the moment. And there's several passages where he says things like, remember that all things that are past are gone and they won't exist again. And all things that are future are not guaranteed. And the only thing that you have right now is the current experience you're having. Even if you think you have some thought about what the future looks like, you have no idea what it is. And you can only be here right now. And that's the only guaranteed thing, and that's the correct way to live. So he's very much saying the Ram Dass, be here now kind of thing.
Yeah.
I think this was a couple years before Ram Dass.
Yeah, I think Ram Dass probably got it from him, not the other way around.
Probably. Yeah, and so those are kind of the recurring themes. And a lot of these are short. I have a bunch of bookmarks here of just little bits that I want to read.
Awesome.
And we can talk about those maybe. This was one that I liked this part so much. I had Sarah read it and had Sean read it because I thought it was so cool.
Mm-hmm.
And he does this a lot. He does a lot of like. There's several things in there that are like, you know, when you're having trouble getting out of bed in the morning. Like apparently that must have been something that he had trouble getting out of bed, and so there's a lot of like encouragement, like when you're having trouble getting out of bed, just don't be a fucking pussy about it and get up. There's a lot of that. When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. They are like this because they can't tell good from evil. But I have seen the beauty of good and the ugliness of evil, and have recognized that the wrongdoer has a nature related to my own, not of the same blood or birth, but the same mind, and possessing a share of the divine, which I interpret that as a part of God or pneuma.
Mm-hmm.
And so none of them can hurt me. No one can implicate me in ugliness, nor can I feel angry at my relative or hate him. We were born to work together like feet, hands, and eyes, like the two rows of teeth, upper and lower. To obstruct each other is unnatural. To feel anger at someone, to turn your back on him, these are obstructions.
That's great.
It's such like, I just love, it's such like hard, like masculine wisdom. I think it's so cool.
Mm-hmm.
I love that idea of like needing to, making sure that you are working with other people, and that like you can't do it alone. You need to be functioning with other people if you're going to get anywhere.
Yeah.
That's a good reminder.
It's a very practical way to advocate for compassion.
Yeah.
It's not fluffy.
Yeah.
Because that doesn't work with men. Be nice. Like,
Yeah.
why? What are you talking about? That doesn't,
Yeah.
you know.
He's not a fluffy guy. There's no fluff to him.
Yeah.
Yeah. All of us are working on the same project, some consciously with understanding, some without knowing it. I think this is what Heraclitus meant when he said, those who sleep are also hard at work, that they too collaborate in what happens. Some of us work in one way and some in others, and those who complain and try to obstruct and thwart things, they help just as much as anyone. The world needs them as well. So make up your mind who you'll choose to work with. The force that directs all things will make good use of you regardless, will put you on its payroll and set you to work. But make sure it's not the job Chrysippus speaks of, the bad line in the play, put there for laughs. So,
Read those last two lines again.
yeah. So make up your mind who you'll choose to work with. The force that directs all things will make good use of you regardless. Will put you on its payroll and set you to work. But make sure it's not the job Chrysippus speaks of. The bad line in the play, put there for laughs.
Oh, wow.
So what he's saying is,
Wow.
whether you choose to participate in the world and to further what God has planned for you, to further the story, you're in the story no matter what. You can choose to participate and you're going to have a better role, but it's already determined what you're going to do and what kind of role you're going to have. And you can choose to participate, but if you don't, and you just are thoughtless and go follow instincts and follow urges, you're playing a role but it's a shitty role.
Yeah.
And I love that last line. Like, don't be the bad line in the play, put there for laughs. Like, because you might be saying something and you don't even know how cosmically stupid what you're saying is.
Right.
And that later when you watch this story back, you're gonna be like, oh my God.
Yeah.
And it's just like you're
Like when you watch a TV show, there's every single time an unlikable character.
mm-hmm.
Every time.
Yeah.
A TV show with all likable characters doesn't work.
No.
So in reality, it's like, oh, the author of this is going to use you to make the show interesting.
Yeah.
But are you going to be the bad guy
Yeah.
that's just there so that the other characters look more likable? Are you going to be used that way?
Sure. And on this, I think this is a little different than being a villain. He's saying, like, you could be the comic relief. You could be saying shit
well,
that's
when
so
I say
stupid.
bad guy, I mean the unlikable. There's
Sure.
likable
Yeah, yeah.
characters and unlikable. Sometimes the bad guys are the likable ones and the protagonists are the unlikable ones.
Mhm.
But there's always a character that is intended for the audience to dislike.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So, but you can flip it either way. There's a line in the Bible that says God will mock those who mock.
I like that.
You go around mocking everything, then everybody just mocks you behind your back because
Sure.
you're too prideful to be mocked to your face.
Yeah.
But it's gonna bounce back
Yeah.
either way. And one of the experiences for me that really brought that line to life was I was watching Charlie, or what was it, Willy Wonka or Charlie and the Chocolate Factory is the old one.
Willy Wonka is the old movie.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So I was watching the old one, Willy Wonka, over and over again because I was working on an essay. I'll probably just do it as a podcast episode because it's so hard to structure the essay. I'm just sick of it. But Christian overlaps between narrative themes in Wonka and narrative themes in the Christian narrative. Not because I think that the story was created with intentional Christian narratives, but because I think they were both timeless, classic, deeply resonant narratives, so they overlap a lot.
Mhm.
And when Wonka introduces all of the kids or welcomes all of the kids into the factory, he talks to all of them like he's really excited to see them, but you know based on the context which ones he's being sarcastic with and which ones
Yeah.
he's being genuine with.
Totally.
So he's totally pleasant with all of them. And oh, Baruka, oh, wonderful, oh, you're so beautiful. And then the unlikable kid who's the embodiment of, what was he? He was the embodiment of laziness and violence, whatever that deadly sin is. Wrath, thank you. He was the embodiment of wrath and sloth because all he did was sit around and watch violent movies. That was what he represented in my essay. And he talks to that kid and it's like, oh, what a wonderful, adorable, likable kid or whatever.
Yeah.
And then it goes to Charlie and he says, I read all about you. I'm so excited to meet you. And it's like, well, how do you know that he's mocking them and he means it with him? He was pleasant to all of them.
Yeah.
How can God mock those who mock but be unconditionally loving of all? Because his unconditional love will reflect off of you as mockery
Yeah.
if you're a little piece of shit.
Yeah.
Genuine love is sarcastic to a piece of shit. So
Sure.
it's like it works both ways. You
Yeah.
know? But that's what that reminded me of. If you set yourself up with a crappy attitude, then reality is going to reflect a crappy attitude off of you, and you'll be
Yeah.
that character.
And that scene, it feels like Willy Wonka, like nobody is getting nobody
Nobody
there
gets it.
gets his joke.
Nobody's getting the
Like
bit.
he's just doing it for the camera. He's
Right.
just doing it because
Right.
like I know what a funny situation this is, and nobody's
Right.
laughing, but that's okay.
Right.
Love that.
Yeah,
That's cool.
It's not for any audience, and that's what really makes a person genuinely funny is when they're funny if they're by themselves, or they'll just
Yeah.
they could do something at the grocery store that's hilarious and never tell a soul about it. You
Yeah.
know, that's just like a comedian who is a comedian, not who plays a comedian.
Yeah.
That's Wonka.
Good shit. All right, next one here. For times when you feel pain, see that it doesn't disgrace you or degrade your intelligence, doesn't keep it from acting rationally or unselfishly. And in most cases, what Epicurus said should help, that pain is neither unbearable nor unending, as long as you keep in mind its limits and don't magnify them in your imagination. And keep in mind, too, that pain often comes in disguise, as drowsiness, fever, loss of appetite. When you're bothered by things like that, remind yourself, I'm giving in to pain. I love that. The idea that like it's all kind of the same thing. It's all uh, like something to complain about, but it just comes in different ways. It's something to like make you feel like, God, what a shitty situation I'm in.
Yeah.
But it's all the
all
same
pain.
kind of thing. It's all
Yeah.
negativity.
But we need to express pain with variety of language so we don't feel like we're incessantly complaining.
Right.
Well,
So
that was
little
a headache.
flavors.
Today I got a stuffed up nose. Tomorrow I'm sleepy. Next,
Right. There's all kinds of different ways
gotta
you can
mix
look at
it
it.
up.
Yeah. And that's one of the examples of like the Goggins kind of stoicism. Like you just ignore the fucking pain. You can get through it, and it's
Yeah.
gonna try and trick you. It's gonna try and make you weak all kinds of ways, but you're stronger than that. You just keep going.
Yeah,
I love it.
yeah. But I do think that David Goggins takes it to an extent of foolishly indulging in pain for the sake of pride, fueled by abuse trauma.
That's a little
And
true.
that's not a good thing. You know, you should embrace pain when it's necessary and you come across it on your natural path.
I don't know. Maybe I
I can't remember
I'm
who
hesitant
said
to
this,
say
but who said this, but man, maybe I'll remember when I say it. Somebody said it's very wise to embrace struggles as you naturally come across them, and it's very unwise to create struggles for yourself. I can't remember who it is, but I strongly believe in that idea. Like you shouldn't, like a Jedi never looks for a fight.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I certainly I don't want to be David Goggins, and I don't think it's I don't think it's a healthy way to live. I don't think
I'm laughing at Evan's reaction when I said that about David Goggins. Evan in the background, he went, oh.
But he is such an interesting guy that like although I'm not going to choose to live that way. I sure like that somebody is. It's
Absolutely.
cool that somebody is embodying that so hard that like
Yeah.
because it reminds us that like oh he can look for so much pain that he's running 100 miles on broken feet. And I don't have to do
Yeah.
that. I just have to deal with the pain that naturally comes to me.
Right.
And so that's very, very easy to get over if he can get over what he gets over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of religious literature about a certain category of monks who practice pain for the sake of enlightenment. I read a book called In Search of the Miraculous, and then it had a super long subtitle. But it was about a mathematician who studies under like a mystic he finds in some fucking spiritual other continent, and they travel around and have adventures together. And that he talks about like the categories of people who search for enlightenment. Like one of the main three was like people who intentionally embrace pain for the purpose of finding enlightenment. And so it's like it is an old religious tradition, and there's obviously something valid about it. And when I came across David Goggins, it was in a phase of my life where I was in constant mental pain and was just trying to get back to normal life. And when I watched David Goggins on who's that tech dork who interviews like entrepreneurs?
Lex?
No, Impact Theory.
I don't
No, he's
know
not a
that one.
tech guy specifically.
Oh, I think I know the interview you're talking about. I feel like I watched that with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The show called Impact Theory, because I sent it to you after I saw it, because I thought it was,
okay.
it was super, super helpful to me.
Yeah.
At the time of life that I was in and the things I was trying to get through, super inspiring. But then once I got out of the pain that I was in, it's like, well, I'm not going to go find pain on purpose, you know? So
Yeah.
I was left feeling like, okay, he is taking it to a silly extent. But he's also one of those heroes on my path who came across at a time in my story where I needed exactly what he had and said something. So
Yeah.
yeah, I like him.
And maybe you'll have some insight on this. I remember Duncan Trussell was on Rogan, and it was the one where we were both like really, really drunk. And he said something, he said that I'm pretty sure Goggins is enlightened. And he didn't elaborate on what he meant by that.
Duncan Trussell said that while drunk with Rogan?
Yeah, he said that about Goggins, that he's pretty sure he's enlightened.
Mm-hmm.
Which, I don't know, maybe if you...
I
maybe if
agree
you
with
take
that
enough pain.
totally vague, undefined statement. I can't explain why.
Okay.
I agree.
He might be.
I don't know.
Yeah.
But I think he's genuinely happy. I believe David Goggins when he says he's a genuinely happy person.
Yeah.
And he doesn't display it in the typical way to display happiness, but I think he has a contentness and a nobility that comes across with being confident beyond confidence in oneself.
Yeah.
That is a form of joy that isn't expressed in things like smiles and milkshakes and jokes and cartwheels,
Yeah.
Just a totally sustainable joy.
Yeah.
I believe he has that in him.
Yeah, and you say, do you know about the milkshakes thing? Did you say milkshakes on purpose?
No, that was just a random silly word I said.
It's funny because when he talks about like the fat piece of shit aspect of his life, he talks about how he used to drink like a milkshake every day, and that like on the day where he finally decided he's gonna change, he was drinking. I think he said he was drinking a 44-ounce milkshake, and he just all of a sudden felt disgusted with himself.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, if we're going to interpret that milkshake synchronicity as something meaningful, maybe that synchronicity is saying that sometimes the way that we interpret joy is really indulgence. Like we think that people appear joyful because we witness them indulging.
Yeah.
And that's really spending joy, not creating it.
Yeah. And I bet that Marcus was probably similar in that, like, I think that he felt content. I think that he didn't feel negativity. And I think that he was just happy. He was content to be neutral at all times because the world is good and he wants to participate in it. So although he wasn't like a jovial person, he wasn't real jolly, he was probably totally content with how life was.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Next one here. When you have to deal with someone, ask yourself, what does he mean by good and bad? If he thinks X or Y about pleasure and pain and what produces them, about fame and disgrace, about death and life, then it shouldn't shock or surprise you when he does X or Y. In fact, I'll remind myself that he has no real choice. So that's like kind of the straw dog idea that, like, well, think about what is it that this person believes. Based on what they believe, should you be surprised at all that this is what they did? Should you be mad at them? This is what they believe, and they don't have a choice but to act out what they are and what they hold to be true.
Yeah.
So don't be mad at them.
Yeah.
They don't get it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of the disagreements happening right now politically where people are outraged at each other on in a moral way, when really the moral decisions that we're making come down to disagreements about information.
Yeah.
Which come down to disagreements about core ideas we're not even consciously aware of.
Yeah.
It just goes so deep. It's like, well, if you had this idea subconsciously that manifested as you being more likely to seek out this information instead of that information, you would also do that thing that's radical and offensive from the worldview that you have found yourself in. But it's not. It's like people see someone else doing something and falsely interpret that action as though it were them doing it. Like, the thing for that person to do that, they falsely think like, well, what would it be like if I did that? Well, if I did that, it would be morally reprehensible. So it's morally reprehensible that they did it. It's like they're in a completely different world.
Totally. Yeah, it's like something that somebody does that if you were to do it, would be morally reprehensible isn't necessarily because they're not playing by the same rules.
Right.
They don't believe that the rules are the same.
Yeah.
I got so annoyed at a Reddit
It's like
comment.
watching a basketball game and you're a football player and being like, I can't believe they're just bouncing the ball on the fucking ground. If I did that in a football game, I'd get laughed off of the field.
Yeah. I got so mad at a Reddit comment the other day that was saying that, like, the people that broke into the Capitol are evil. And it was, like, all caps, evil people.
Right.
Which is goofy. 'Cause,
Right.
like, do you know what they think? Do you know what
Right.
they think? If you know what they think, then you wouldn't think they were evil.
Yeah.
If you thought what they thought, then
If
you
you
would do
thought,
that
if you
too.
think that Congress people are just reasonable human beings who are a little bit corrupt, you know, because of its powers got into their head, and the election was fair, and then you stormed the Capitol, you're a psychopath.
Yeah,
You're
yeah,
a fucking psychopath.
right.
But
That's not what you think
that's
happened.
not the world
Then
that
you're
they're
not a
living in.
psychopath.
Yeah, that's not the world that they're living in. They're
Yeah.
just from, but the ideas that they have that are different than yours are stacked on top of 100 other ideas, and you don't even know what's at the bottom of it.
Right.
You haven't thought to the bottom of their philosophy or your own. So it's like,
Yeah. And I definitely think that that's something we are very much lacking right now, is that sort of willingness to try and understand the perspective of someone else. Because if you understand it, then you can forgive anything they do.
yeah. Or maybe even help untie their shoes instead of get mad at them for tripping.
Totally.
You got to get all the way down to those shoes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not untie them because they're tied to one another. The shoes are tied together. Not
Sure.
untie them to make them trip. But you know what I mean?
I didn't even think about the metaphor. I got what you meant.
Wasn't a metaphor, it was an analogy.
Oh, okay. Maybe.
I think it was a metaphor, actually.
Okay. Well, now we'll do this. What's an
No, I don't want to
analogy?
do this. Because what really matters is how I worded it, not the definition of a metaphor and analogy. I can't remember how I worded the shoe thing.
We'll have to. This will just be in the description. We'll hash
Yeah.
out who's right.
We will.
All right. Give yourself a gift. The present moment. People out for posthumous fame forget that the generations to come will be the same annoying people they know now, and just as mortal. Why does it matter to you if they say X or if they say X about you or think Y?
I love his uses of X and Y. I love that.
Yeah, I don't know.
To totally remove the individual complexities
Yeah,
of examples by just plugging X or Y into them.
yeah,
It can be so useful to help you think in a way that's usefully detached from the
Yeah.
details and messiness of the context of little situations.
totally. Because there's nothing to disagree with. Because it's like you can put in the variable that you want to put in there,
Right.
and it could be anything. It
Right.
could be literally anything, and it's still true.
Right.
Objective judgment now, at this very moment. Unselfish action now, at this very moment. Willing acceptance now, at this very moment, of all external events. That's all you need.
That's Buddhist as hell.
It's really like there's so many like this that are just such dense wisdom. It's so like just
Yeah.
really straight to the point. And
You can get
expresses
all
a
the way to
lot.
the tippity top of the whole shebang with that stupid mantra right there.
Yeah.
Sit down and say that mantra for 10 years.
Yeah, it's a little bit like just breaking apart be here now into three things. You know what? It's a lot like the serenity prayer: willing acceptance, unselfish action, objective judgment.
Wow, yeah.
It's exactly the same
Because the
principle.
serenity prayer is like in 3 parts too.
Yeah,
Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage
Acceptance.
to change the things I can,
action,
wisdom to know the difference.
judgment.
3 parts and the
Yeah.
same exact 3 elements.
Good shit.
Very interesting.
Yeah. You can discard most of the junk that clutters your mind, things that exist only there, and clear out space for yourself. And I love that phrase, things that exist only there. There are things that I think about in my head that I don't talk to anyone about. That
Yeah.
they're just like, it's just not worth talking about. So why do I let my mind wander on those things? I don't know.
Right.
But you can discard most of the junk that clutters your mind, things that exist only there, and clear out space for yourself.
Oh, things that exist only there. I get it.
Yeah.
That's cool.
By comprehending the scale of the world, by contemplating infinite time, by thinking of the speed with which things change, each part of everything, the narrow space between our birth and death, the infinite time before, the equally unbounded time that follows. So these are like, what he's saying is, here's a couple things where if you're feeling unfocused and you want to clear your mind of whatever dumb stuff you're thinking about, think about infinite time.
Mm-hmm.
Think about how big time is, or just think about the bigness of the universe. By comprehending the scale of the world, by contemplating infinite time, And by thinking of the speed with which things change, so just think about the fact that like, oh no, this moment only exists right now,
Yeah.
and everything is decomposing and becoming something else all the
Right.
time around me.
What's that Egyptian idea, the Horus and the something something? Like the actor in the story and the father watching from outside the story.
Oh yeah, it was Horus and Osiris, I think.
Yeah, which one's
Yeah.
which? Do you know?
Horus is the father.
I know
Osiris is the
Osiris is
son.
the actor. Yeah, so it's like you're an actor in this story,
Hmm.
and so if somebody were to ask, how do you not get overwhelmed with the role that you're playing in this story? And I hear Marcus Aurelius saying, "Oh, I just zoom all the way out." You know,
Yeah.
I think about infinite time.
Yeah.
Because I mean, if you only think about infinite time, then you're like a hippie on a blanket in the grass somewhere. That it's like, which they're right, and that
Yeah.
perspective is needed for sure. But it's like, but you're not participating in the particulars of your story.
Yeah.
Like play your part, do something. But then on the other hand, there's people that get so caught up in just what they're doing. It's like, oh, you
Get
need to
some
go get on
perspective.
the blanket in the grass. Like you need to
Yeah.
zoom all the way out. Like he just sounds so grounded in both.
Yeah.
So he's so effective and present as a ruler, but he's so aware of infinitude that he doesn't like lose that perspective.
Yeah. It reminds me of like being asleep and being awake. Like that you have to be awake and you have to focus and do your work, but you also have to check out and rest in between in order to get back into it and for your body to be ready to go again.
Yeah.
So it's like you have to be in your life and focused on it. But if you get too stuck in that, you need to zoom out a little bit and rest from
Yeah.
being Marcus Aurelius all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think real sainthood or enlightenment or whatever consists of establishing a state of consciousness that is both simultaneously. I think that's the goal,
Hmm.
to be totally present and totally detached simultaneously, so that you're totally
Yeah.
effective and take nothing personally.
Yeah.
I think that's the ultimate goal when it comes to perspective.
Right.
And then if you're in that perspective as your default, if you're in that state of consciousness, I should say, as your default, then you can easily take on another person's perspective. If Evan
Sure.
says something that just throws me through a loop, it's like, let me think for a second. Let me look at that from Evan's. Okay,
Yeah.
pretty quickly. Okay, I can see that from your perspective, and you don't get anxious when you encounter someone you disagree with. If that's your default, you can kind of get anywhere from there. You
Yeah.
can get to any perspective from there.
Totally. And I think that is definitely what Marcus strove to be. Strove, is that a word?
Strived.
Striven. He had striven to
Strivodes.
strifopodes. he he wanted to be totally present, totally in the moment, but also not be upset by anything, to not
Mhm.
let anything bother him. So he was paying attention to everything, but getting upset about none of it, and just, oh, is that what comes next?
Yeah.
Then I will do what needs to be done next.
Yeah.
Emotionlessly. Yeah.
But that wouldn't mean, I don't think that would mean emotionless. I think that would mean with total acceptance and embracing of all emotion. Like I feel like I don't know about Marcus Aurelius, so maybe you can let me know if he said anything on this subject, but I feel like that Osiris and Horus presence where you're totally zoomed out and totally present means that you're not at all afraid to be totally sad, totally grieving, totally frustrated, whatever it is, just like because that perspective reminds you that it's not permanent. So you don't have that anxiety when you're sad of like, is this sadness going to last forever? Because the part of you that's present is sad. But
Hmm.
the part of you that's detached is like, I know this sadness isn't going to last forever. Therefore, I'm okay with embracing it totally in this moment right now.
Yeah.
I'm sad. Or if someone's sad in front of you, you're not hesitant to feel that sadness with them because you know it's not going to last forever because of that part of you that's detached.
Hmm.
So did he say anything about emotional control? Because I know that some of those Greek philosophers were so worshiping of logic, and also so misogynistic, and they so associated emotion with femininity
Sure.
that they felt like they should be detached from emotion completely.
Yeah.
And I do feel like psychopathy can be next to enlightenment in the sense that it involves a detachment,
Sure.
but it doesn't involve detachment with understanding and presence.
Hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Um, I don't. The impression I get from what he's written is all. It feels like everything that he wrote is very emotionless, and I could be projecting just the word stoic, my understanding of stoicism,
Mm.
onto what he's saying, and so I'm
Yeah.
imagining him as like as a as a stoic person who like just never really gets upset and he or tries really hard not to be.
Yeah.
But surely he did, because he wrote a bunch of scrolls reminding himself not to be afraid and not to be annoyed. I'm
Right.
sure he got annoyed with people all the time, which is why he had to keep reminding himself, don't get annoyed at these people.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that he felt emotions, but I get the impression that any negative emotion was something he tried to avoid, and that it wasn't something he would try to be in the moment for. Like he wouldn't
Mm-hmm.
be in the moment for crying. Like he would rather focus on the fact that like, so my seventh kid is dead. I will continue on now, and
Mm-hmm.
I will have more, and hope for a boy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Interesting.
that's my impression of him, but it's not
Yeah.
totally clear. It could have been either way.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And it's not like he intended for this book to be an effective expression of who he was
right.
in totality. Like it's
Yeah,
not like this is his summary of his personality.
yeah,
So you don't need to remind yourself to feel sad. So if this is his reminders for himself, maybe he had that whole emotional spectrum, but this just wasn't the place to express it. That's not
right,
what this was for.
right. And it may have even been that there was more that was like that, but whoever compiled this together wanted to depict him as strong as possible. Could have been he
Right.
wrote 1,000 scrolls, and they're like, these 12 are really hard. Let's put
Yeah.
these all together and
Yeah.
let's put it out there and you know
Yep. True.
depict him that way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, don't know. Either the gods have power or they don't. If they don't, why pray? If they do, then why not pray for something else instead of for things to happen or not to happen? Pray not to feel fear or desire or grief. If the gods can do anything, they can surely do that for us. But those are things that the God left but those are things the gods left up to me. So what he's doing here is he's like having a conversation with himself. So he's saying either it matters or it doesn't, but those things are God's left up to me. Then isn't it better to do what's up to you like a free man than to be passively controlled by what isn't, like a slave or beggar? And what makes you think that the gods don't care about what's up to us? Start praying like this, and you'll see. Not some way to sleep with her, but a way to stop wanting to. Not some way to save my child, but a way to lose your fear. Redirect your prayers like that and watch what happens.
Mm.
So instead of like remove remove the temptation from you, instead pray for the strength to be able to resist that temptation.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, instead of praying that something scary doesn't happen, pray that you have the courage to not be afraid when it does,
Yeah.
because it will happen, and you can't wish that there's never going to be something scary, because you know that that's not how it works.
Right.
And I feel like that's pretty cool prayer advice.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like you have to think about death a lot to pray like that because you're just constantly saying just like, well, kill the part of me that's not going to be useful when I deal with this next thing. All right,
Yeah.
now kill this part of me that's not going to be useful as I deal with this next thing. It's
Totally.
and it's a constant self-sacrifice.
Yeah, constantly giving up parts of himself, because he's ready to die any day. He's ready to die anytime.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Everything that happens is either endurable or not. If it's endurable, then endure it. Stop complaining. If it's unendurable, then stop complaining. Your destruction will mean its end as well. Just remember, you can endure anything your mind can make endurable by treating it as in your interest to do so, in your interest or in your nature. So you can do anything, and if you can't, shut up about it. You're going to die anyway, so what are you complaining about?
Mm-hmm.
Which is, I mean, that's not advice you can really give anybody. Like, what are you complaining about? What are you going to die? If you die, then shut up.
Right.
You'll be dead. Who
Right.
cares?
Yeah, you can really only say that to yourself.
Yeah, and that's what he was doing. He wasn't telling anybody, what the
Right.
fuck? What do you mean? You can, are you saying you'll die? Then shut up.
Die, you little pussy.
Yeah. love this one. The despicable phoniness of people who say, listen, I'm going to level with you here.
Every salesman.
The despicable phoniness of people who say, listen, I'm going to level with you here. What does that mean? It shouldn't even need to be said. It should be obvious, written in block letters on your forehead. It should be audible in your voice, visible in your eyes, like a lover who looks straight into your face and takes in the whole story at a glance. A straightforward, honest person should be like someone who stinks when you're in the same room with him. You know it. But false straightforwardness is like a knife in the back. False friendship is the worst. Avoid it at all costs. If you're honest and straightforward and mean well, it should show in your eyes. It should be unmistakable. So
the despicable phoniness of people who say, look, I'm going to level with you here.
It's really good.
Me and this guy Chase that I worked with were talking about how annoying it is. He had a friend who did it. I had a pastor who did it. It would say, can I just be honest with you guys for a second?
What do you mean? Huh?
What?
What does that mean? It shouldn't even need to be said.
Right.
It should be obvious, written in block letters on your forehead. Everybody should just be being honest all the time.
Jesus said, let your yes be yes and your no be no. Any other answer has evil attached to it.
Interesting. Yeah. Like if you're at
Same
all
exact
trying to
thing.
Yeah.
And he did a little roasting session kind of like that too, where he's like, people will tell you they'll swear on this and swear on that. What do you need to swear on all of this for? Just tell the truth.
Yeah. That was a good one. And that's one that feels like it's kind of funny because it's like this shows that clearly he gets annoyed because he's annoyed when he wrote this.
Clearly.
He's annoyed with all these people that are bullshitting and saying, look, I'm just going to be straight with you, dog.
Yeah.
So you haven't been.
Right.
Not usually.
Right. Or at least you generally think that people aren't always, so it needs to be specified, which means you're a lot less likely to be straightforward.
Yeah, you think it's normal to be not straightforward.
Right.
Yeah.
Which pretty much means you're not.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's like you're putting the blame on, hey man, that's just how it is. Like it's not because I'm a dishonest person,
Right.
but we both know.
You know how people aren't generally straightforward? Well, you know what I'm about to do?
I'm gonna do the opposite. I'm gonna be straight with you. Despicable phoniness. And this is the last one. To be angry at something means you've forgotten that everything that happens is natural, that the responsibility is theirs, not yours, and further, that whatever happens has always happened and always will and is happening at this very moment everywhere, just like this. What links one human being to all humans, not blood or birth, but mind. And that an individual's mind is God and of God, that nothing belongs to anyone. Children, body, life itself, all of them come from that same source. That it's all how you choose to see things. That the present is all we have to live in or to lose. That's real good.
Yeah.
And that kind of encapsulates a lot of it. Like that's be here now, but it's also remember that this is not like don't try and attribute bad to things. Just remember that it is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And I also like that it ties into that idea of like everybody being an aspect of God or everybody being like a piece of God, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I like that one a lot.
That's what it is.
Yeah. So this was a lot of fun to read. It was a lot of fun to learn about Stoicism and hear such hard-ass wisdom from this, what was referred to as probably the closest thing to, was it Plato or Socrates that came up with the idea of the philosopher king?
I don't know.
Was it Plato? Okay. Okay. That Marcus Aurelius was the closest thing.
I always forget we have to repeat what Evan said. He said it's from Republic by Plato.
Oh, right.
He was inspired by Socrates, so maybe it was Socrates.
And Plato was a student of Socrates, so maybe it was Socrates.
Okay.
Evan said. Yeah.
So we're not sure. But yeah, that he was the closest thing to the philosopher king that we've ever had is Marcus Aurelius, who was a leader that was also...
Did Plato didn't say that about Marcus Aurelius, but...
No.
So, oh, you're just saying that about Marcus Aurelius?
Yeah, yeah. Well, that was something Greg Hayes said about him. That it's about
Oh,
the
okay.
closest thing to Plato's philosopher king that has ever existed. And Plato, yeah, it was definitely before this.
I think,
Yeah, Plato was like 300, 400 BC.
yeah.
Three, 400 BC.
Plato was 3 or 400 BC. Yeah.
He lived in that century.
Okay.
So he was a really interesting guy and a good king and someone that you can get a lot of wisdom from. And I think Stoicism is
This is all we have of what he wrote, right? Besides his letters with his teacher.
there. I mean, there might be more. I know that there's the letters with Fronto, and there is like a biography that's written about him that's kind of pieced together from different things.
Hmm.
That some, according to Greg Hayes, some sources are kind of dubious, and he doesn't trust all of it. But there is some more information out there about him. But it's been so long that it's hard to know what exactly is true or not.
Right.
But when anybody talks about Marcus Aurelius, they're going to talk about this book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Do you have any questions?
No, dude.
Okay.
Freaking set. That book is sick.
That was fun.
Yeah.
Night school.
Nice. Cool.